Do you think AI are going to take away our jobs?
AI.
AI is opening up a lot of opportunities for people. People are able to be more efficient with their work. They're learning new skills. They're able to, and it's creating this really, this leveling almost.
Do you think the top 100 schools will still have incredible people who apply to their schools, but the admission rates are still extremely low?
Higher education is broken in a lot of ways. Some of those engineering schools have top brands. Some of those engineering schools don't have top brands. And then there are top brands that don't even have engineering. So say you're a student and you're a really smart person and you're not sure what you want to do.
Right.
You do have kind of that engineering mentality. You kind of think you might go in that direction and you're making that decision.
What myths about success do you wish more entrepreneurs would unlearn?
Laura Huang is a distinguished professor of management and organizational development.
Where do you see yourself going? Where do you see this company going?
She's a Wall Street Journal best-selling author. Her book titled Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage, outlines her research about how being underestimated can be your greatest asset.
Find a good mentor. When you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's actually how your effort and hard work harder for you.
Laura's mission is simple: to help entrepreneurs and leaders turn setbacks into fuel, creating opportunities where others see obstacles. Named one of the top 40 business school professors in a Thinkers50 global mind, Laura is a frontrunner in the field of business education.
Today we're going to talk about finding your edge.
She also leads the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative and specializes in studying the unmeasurable factors of business, like gut feeling, bias, and leverage. Get ready. Today's Conductive Conversations will talk about why many entrepreneurs fail and how AI can boost their chances of success.
In our next episode of Conductive Conversations, I get the opportunity to interview distinguished business school professor Laura Huang. Laura is the Associate Dean of Executive Education and Distinguished Professor of Management and Entrepreneurship at Northeastern University in Boston. When I met Laura, she was a professor at Harvard Business School, where my co-founder Paul went to school and decided not to join Tesla when it was still private. More on that later. Laura has written 2 books. The first is called Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. And the second, which was just recently released, is called You Already Know, The Science of Mastering Your Intuition. Now, on Conductive Conversations, we often interview folks that have unconventional backgrounds because we really believe that the type of entrepreneurs that we are backing day in and day out are those that have unconventional backgrounds. And so in this podcast, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper as to Laura's background, why we think it's so unconventional that she took this path to become a professor, and what her research has actually yielded that could be helpful to entrepreneurs, both near and far. Her research is really interesting because it examines how individuals make high-stakes decisions in the face of uncertainty, which I'm sure if you're an entrepreneur today, you can relate to. And it's really how entrepreneurs can harness the intersection of data, experience, and intuition to drive better outcomes in both work and life. Laura is a Kauffman Fellow, as well as being named one of the top 40 business school professors. Join me in welcoming Laura to Conductive Conversations.
All right, so let's get started. Okay, first question.
Yeah.
Growing up, what experiences do you think really informed you about kind of writing your books about You Already Know and then Edge?
Oh my gosh, so many experiences. I feel like so many of the initial, all of my, the foundation of so much of our mental models, our schemas, our prototypes, our patterns are just formed from things that happened to us when we're young, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we tend to think about our careers very linearly. Like
Yeah.
we worked here and then here and then here and then here. But actually, our lives are really not linear, and the way that we process information is like something happens yesterday, or we see a signal, and then it makes us remember something that happened when we were 5 years old or when we were in elementary school. So there's so many experiences. I mean, I think the ones that stick out a lot is, my parents were immigrants,
Yep.
and I remember, growing up, seeing both my mother and my father, getting turned down for promotion after promotion after promotion. And I remember during one of those turned down promotions, asking my father, why is it that you think you didn't get that job? Like, why didn't you get that? And because everyone in the company sort of knew he was more qualified. He was the one doing the job for the person who had gotten promoted over him. And I remember just sort of asking him, like, why do you think you didn't get that promotion?
Right.
And he said something like, oh, I don't know, it's probably because of my accent or the way I communicate or something like that. And I think that informed a lot of, and I was too young to really understand a lot of the things that I ended up studying later on around perceptions and attributions and all of those things. But it was one of those things I remember because not only did I sort of experience my own version of that, but I remember it being a part of growing up and seeing that from these people that my family members, my mother and my father. And so when I became a researcher, those were the types of things that I wanted to study. I have so many stories along those lines. I mean, I even remember like in college when I was taking, I'm a writer now, right? And I remember in college I was taking the university writing course, right? It was that freshman course that everyone had to take to make sure that you could write. And I was an engineer, so in all fairness, right, I wasn't supposed to know how to write, but yet the sort of comment I got from my professor in that writing course was, I remember getting that first essay back and I had gotten a D+. Wow. And I was like, what? And I went to talk to the professor, and the professor was like, it's fine. That's the point of this course. You're not a native English speaker. And so the point of this course is to help you, and so it's like, we remember all of those things that around these perceptions, these stereotypes, these attributions that people make about us that make us feel like we have to do something extra. We have to present ourselves differently. And, so I could go on and on and on, but
So I'm curious, when you look at your background, what led you to go down the academic path? Because obviously you didn't start that way.
No, not at all. I mean, it was very, it was not again, like in the spirit of like, it was not linear at all. I mean, so I had, I was trained as an engineer, and I had started working in engineering and was working in new product development. And then I had a manager who said, you can actually, you actually are pretty good at like talking about these products. And so he pulled me onto a technical marketing team. Okay. From there, they sent me to get my MBA. And when I was getting my MBA, that's when I really started even knowing about the world of research and academia. We started doing some research with some professors and realizing, oh my gosh, I actually really, really like this stuff. And I like writing about it. I like doing the research. I like doing the data. But I had all these student loans that I had to pay off, right? Not only those that I had accumulated from my MBA days, but also those that I had still not paid back from my undergraduate days.
Oh, wow.
And because I wasn't going back to that company, I knew I wasn't going to go back to that company. I had to repay all these loans. Anyway, so I asked all of my friends in my MBA program, what's the quickest way to pay off student loans? What's the quickest way to pay off student loans? And everyone kept saying to me, go into iBanking, go into iBanking, go into iBanking. Yeah. And I was so clueless about financial services, I admit, that I even remember turning to a friend and saying, wow, this internet banking thing is really big these days. Everyone keeps telling me to go into iBanking, having no idea that the I stood for investment banking. I mean, I had learned about, in finance courses, I had learned about Black-Scholes and all these things. I just didn't know the lingo, that iBanking was investment banking. I thought it stood for internet banking. But, started applying to investment banking positions. And, when I finally lucked myself into a position in investment banking, that was sort of, but I had realized that, that seed had been already planted, that I wanted to be a professor, that I wanted to go into research. This was just a way of paying back those student loans. And so I always tell my students, feel free to wait, right? We've all got responsibilities. We've got mortgages, we've got loans, we've got kids, we've got all these things, but just don't wait too long, right? Put things in place that will allow you to still go after your goals, that go after your dreams, even keeping in mind that you have all of these responsibilities. So what I did was I actually wrote a note to myself when I started working in investment banking, and I put it in my, how in the Outlook calendar you can have a invite pop out, those alerts, right? And so I had put an invite calendar invite and with a note written to myself, and on the 1-year anniversary of working in that bank, that invite popped up, and I saw that note to myself, which was like around, here's what you're thinking, you wanna go get a PhD, but you had to pay off these loans, and kind of here's what your goals are. And so I kind of read that letter to myself, and I was like, okay, and then went back to work. On the 2-year anniversary, I had that same note pop up with a resignation letter attached this time.
Oh, wow.
And on that 2-year anniversary, I submitted my resignation letter. And I did that because it's so easy to get caught up in the next bonus, the next thing that's vesting, the project that you're working on. And if you don't sort of put those kind of things in place for yourself, reminding yourself, I wanted to write that note because I could have changed my mind. I could have fallen in love with investment banking, with financial services, and gone on a completely different path. But I also wanted to remind myself to not forget of what I had been thinking. And so, that was sort of my way of and I resigned on that day.
Wow.
Took a 90% cut in salary, right? But those are the things that I needed to do for myself, because again, it's so easy to get caught up in the, oh my gosh, I didn't get Laura, I did a little bit, but it was very painful to, that 90% cut in salary was very, very painful. But, it's very easy to just get caught up in the, in the...
I have to imagine that, given your work experience in both product engineering and then in banking and finance, that it probably informs you as a professor, the kind of theoretical academic approach to teaching business. But then you can actually pair that with, hey, when I actually did this, right? Because the two often aren't the same, right? They're sort of this is how it's taught, and then this is actually how it's done.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so. I hope I have that. There's two sides of it, right? There are definitely those days where I see, I proudly see my students become these hugely successful, IPOing their company, right? And I'm like, oh, wow. And I'm, and they're wildly successful and wildly wealthy. And then there are those days where I'm like, oh man, I should have done it, right? I should have been that operator. I should have done that. But then, I think about it as if I was to do it for the money, right? If I was doing it for the money, then I would have just stayed in banking, right? If I wasn't doing it for what I really, that impact, for wanting to loving the understanding of it, loving the research behind it, loving being able to put that message out. So there's that trade-off, right? And so, but yes, I do hope that experience that I've had, and when I was, even as an engineer, I had started a company, right? So knowing kind of what it was like being in it, knowing what it's like to try and get a company from 0 to 1 or 1 to 100 and trying to scale a company. So those experiences, so it's the kind of personal experiences as well as the expertise through the study of it, as well as kind of the multi-different functions. I hope that that's providing the frameworks, the lessons, the kind of the teaching that people are getting something from.
What do you think most people misunderstand about being a professor? the most?
Yeah.
Or what are the misconceptions?
Yeah. So there's the specific one around the fact that I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, which is the question that people always ask me around, like, can you teach entrepreneurship, right? And then I always sort of say, well, the kind of off the cuff answer is, well, my business card says professor of entrepreneurship, so yes, you can teach it. But no, more seriously, I do think you can teach it, but it's not taught in the way that you think other disciplines are taught, right? Teaching entrepreneurship is about putting them in those scenarios, right? What would you do, right? Imagine you are this founder, what would you do? And then sort of hearing the different perspectives and getting your hands dirty, very experiential and scenario-based, role-playing, doing all of the things that, because that's what surprises you. That's what you're like, oh my gosh, like, it's so obvious the answer is X. And then you hear someone on the other side of the room saying, no, I think it's Y. And you're like, how could there be this huge divide? So there's that sort of experiential, that piece of it that I think you can teach entrepreneurship, because it's not about teaching, it's about the tactical decisions. It's about building that intuition. It's about building those mental models and that intuitive process around, one day when you're out there doing it, it seems like it's intuitive, but it's really based on all of these things that you have thought about and experienced and learned and heard about. So that's the entrepreneurship piece. But I think in general, one of those things that it's really, as a professor, I love to sort of have the things that I'm teaching be really practical. These strategic, like practical tactics, ways of doing things. And I think sometimes what's misunderstood is that that not just entrepreneurship, but being a professor in academia is about just the frameworks, the theoretical behind something. And and there certainly is that part of it, but what really allows me to believe in the tactical, the practical, what you can go out there and do it, is that I actually know the research behind it. Whereas sometimes I see people giving advice on the tactical and it's not really backed up. It's backed up by anecdotal evidence, and it's not backed up by the data, the statistics, the studies that have gone into it. And so, I think there's that balance between those two things that really makes academia and those who can bridge the theoretical with the practical really, really something different. I think that's the power of it. That's what I like to sort of think is the superpower of those professors who can do it.
What do you actually enjoy the most about being a professor?
Probably working with like people who are actually doing it, right? Because it's the theoretical, like I said, I love that. I do love the research behind it, but if it's just in a vacuum, if I'm just sort of, there's the research papers piece of it, right? Where I'm writing the academic journal piece, where maybe, there's a handful of people, my mother, actually my mother's not even reading these papers because they're so dense, but being able to translate that and talk to, entrepreneurs, talk to, be actually in the room, helping them struggling through these sort of issues. I love that piece of it,
Do you ever take a step back and think, so you talk about how you really enjoy the student aspect of it and seeing them apply it in the real world? You brought up an interesting question earlier about, can entrepreneurship be taught? Many of these students who have effectively self-selected your courses, right? And said, hey, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship. What do you think their lives would have been like if they either dropped out, never took your course? Would they be great entrepreneurs with or without?
I think things have changed a lot, right? So on the one hand, I think there's still value to an MBA education, for example, but times have changed where I see some entrepreneurs and I think, if your ultimate goal, right? Tony Hsieh, right, the late founder of Zappos, always said, like, if your ultimate goal is to be an entrepreneur, right, take the money you would have spent on your MBA and put it towards building a business instead, right? Succeed or fail, the things that you're going to be learning. And so I do believe that in many senses of the world, right? That if your ultimate goal is to build a company, to be an entrepreneur, and you know what that looks like, right? That's the key, if you know what that looks like. But a lot of times people are still sort of iterating. They're still trying to figure out, they know where their technical expertise might be, right? Maybe they understand a little bit about commercialization, but they're still trying to figure out like, where is my place, right? They're still trying to figure out, how do I know that this idea is a good enough one to quit my job? Or how do I know that this idea is a good enough one to not go into this other industry or this other role? And so there's a piece of the MBA that allows them to kind of bob and weave and like navigate, hear things from others, get lots of different perspectives as they're still trying to figure that out. And I think that makes them, a much more valuable entrepreneur later on. I think the other thing in terms of like those that are self-selecting into my class, for sure, they're self-selecting because they already have the bug. They know that they want to, or maybe they've already started a company and now they're just trying to figure out how to take what was a lifestyle company and really like grow it and scale it and make it something big, right? And what I think is always so funny is that some of my worst students end up becoming the best entrepreneurs, right? Some of those C students, right, that end up, and I admire that. I think that's, I think there's a quality about them where they really are coming in, and I love this. I love that they're sort of picking and choosing what they want to learn. They're not sort of saying like, look, I'm going to try and understand all of this and ace all of this. They're coming in because they're like, ooh, I want a little bit of this and a little bit of that and not so much of this. And I think the best entrepreneurs do that really well. They triangulate, right? They go out there and they ask for advice. They look for mentorship. They look for expertise in certain areas, and they realize that not one person or one area or one domain is going to give them everything. And so they're very naturally good at saying, okay, yep, I like a little bit of this and this. I'm going to chuck out all the rest of that. And then this person or this domain or this area of expertise, you know what? I really think that we can import a little bit of this and that. And so they're very good at triangulating in a way that is fitting it together, right? They're like engaging in bricolage all the time, right? Like the sort of like, MacGyver kind of thing, right? Like, oh, a paper clip and a rubber band and like a wad of chewing gum, and I'm gonna put this together, and at the end of the episode, I'm gonna push a button, the bomb will fizzle, and the world will be saved, right? They're very good at that, right? Because entrepreneurs are resource constrained, right? So they have to be very good at looking and finding what they can find on hand and putting it together in really innovative ways. And they do that not just with resources and materials, but they do that with people and advice and courses, right? And so those who already have that in their mind get a lot more from their MBA, and I don't mind at all, right? Like I don't mind at all. I think that that's great, and I love when they stay in touch with me, and those even when they are C students or whatever, those are the ones who come back to me, and we, for years and years and years, I still keep in touch with them and root for their success.
That's awesome. Okay, so as someone who has studied bias, perception, and gut instincts, how much of your own story has been influenced by being underestimated or overlooked?
Yeah, I mean, so much of, I think as a lot of the research that I've done has been informed by things that I've seen and me as well. So, the books that I've written, Edge actually was the first book, but it was more of my recent research. And You Already Know was the research that I had started out with, where I had studied intuition. And I'll give you a little bit of background on the writing of both of these. I mean, my research on gut feel and intuition really came from, this this notion that there are some things that are unquantifiable in our world, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, there's complexity in the world. And as an engineer, I had tried to quantify everything, right? And so then when I went from the engineering world to the business world, and I realized, wow, like even I could have the best product, I could have the best technology, but it's still not what makes it. And that's because there are people involved, right? There are all of these signals and gut feel. And so what I really want to do was trying to quantify the unquantifiable. And so that's why a lot of my earliest research was around the science of this, the science of trying to quantify what intuition is, what gut feel is, so that we can understand it. And if we can understand it, then we can start to hone it and harness it and really train it, and train it in a way that we can make decisions in a way that we trust. But I ended up writing Edge first, which was really because before I had even started studying gut feel, what kicked this off was that I was trying to understand just success in general. Because I had seen that, success, there's lots of different definitions of success, right? We can take the traditional definitions, right? So CEOs of companies, world record holders, Olympic gold medalists, and I had been interviewing all of the traditional definitions of success in my research. But I also started interviewing non-traditional definitions of success. So, formerly incarcerated individuals that were getting back on their feet, right? So folks like Dave Dahl, who started Dave's Killer Bread, right? A tremendously successful company, who was formerly incarcerated, but remembered from his childhood that he loved to bake artisanal breads and started this massive company, right? So formerly incarcerated individuals who were able to get back on their feet, and women who had been out of the workplace for decades and able to get back on their feet, and everything in between, right? And what I found from a lot of this research, not just the interviews, but also the field experiments, the archival data, all of the things that I was conducting studies on, was that 100% of these individuals, every single one of them, when I asked them, what's the secret to your success, right? They would say, hard work. I work hard. Grit, hard work, right? But yet, every single one of those people, when I scratched under the surface a little bit, every single one of those people admitted that hard work alone was not enough. That it wasn't just hard work, that you could take two different people who work equally as hard, and one would inevitably be more successful than the other. Why was that? And then they would start to admit, well, that's because of bias and stereotypes, and because of judgments that people placed on me, or constraints or barriers, or all of these other things. And so what I found was that actually what the secret to their success was, that 100% of these people were able to do, was that they were able to gain an edge. That they were able to take these constraints and these barriers and even their stereotypes and flip them in their favor. Flip them in their favor so that they could gain an advantage and gain an edge. And not in sort of a negative way, not in a negative way, but just be able to take the things that people thought were constraints and stereotypes and turn that into an authentic advantage for themselves. And that's what gave them an edge. And so I wanted to write that book first, right? Because it was a book that I would have wanted to read as I was progressing through my career. It was a book that I wanted to.
So is this post MBA Laura? Or
yes, it was.
Laura?
Well, it was. Oh, when was the book written?
No.
Oh,
like if you were, to.
That I would have. Yeah, I would have wanted to read it really early on. Like I would have wanted to receive it maybe even as like a high school graduation gift, or when I was or when I was in college, or maybe when I was like working on a company when I was an engineer, right? Yeah. And like seeing that there were all of these barriers that,
But do you think you would be able to contextualize that until you actually experience it or see it in a workplace?
A lot of it is intuitive that I then put a lot of the background frameworks on. Like I think a lot of the people who do read it now, they say, I love that I do a couple of these things already. And then it helps me understand the ways, and it helps me sort of do more of it, or do more of it in these ways. It helps me put it together, because really it's a framework. Like the EDGE stands for the components, right? It's about, E stands for enrich, and it's about how do we enrich and provide value in any context that we're going to be in, right? So it's about that self-awareness, but it's more than that. It's also understanding the underlying perceptions that others have about how we enrich and provide value. The D stands for delight. How do we delight our customers? How do we delight our counterparts? Yeah, exactly. So even though it stands for how do we gain an edge, it stands for the components of how we gain an edge.
Okay, so
right?
rich, delight.
Delight is about how do we delight our counterparts, right? We all have authentic, natural ways that we delight our customers, our suppliers, our investors. How do we kind of harness that, our ability to delight, right? The G stands for guide, which is to say even when we enrich and delight, we still need to be guiding the perceptions that others have about us. Okay. And the final E stands for effort and hard work, which comes last, which is kind of what I talked about a little bit before. Hard work is critical. I would never say that
it's table stakes.
I would never say that it's not critical, right? But it comes last, because when we know how we enrich and delight and guide, that's when our hard work actually works harder for us, right? That's when we get the tailwinds from the effort. That's when we start to, because we hear the advice like, put your head down, right? Just work hard. Right. Your hard work will speak for itself. Right. You know, even if you have to work twice as hard for half the amount of benefits, put your head down and work hard. Right. And what I found is that why not work twice as hard for twice the amount of benefits, or even 3 times the amount of benefits? And that's what you can get when you start to know how you enrich and delight and guide, so that your effort and hard work can work harder for you. So in the first book, each of the sections, the first section is about effort, the second section is about delight, the third section is about guide, and so on and so forth, and how it all comes together for you to practically be able to find how you can gain that edge, right? And so that was sort of the first book, really informed by the experiences that I had had, the people that I had interviewed, all of these super successful people and what they had to go through, right? So I talked about, one of the people I interviewed in the book is a politician, but he's blind. Right? And everyone talked about how, how are you going to do this? Like, you're blind, you have to canvas, you have to go out, right? And how he was able to turn that into an edge for himself and turn that into connections, right? He said how he was blind and he would literally make people lead him, guide him, walk with him. And as he, right? So things like that. And then you already know was sort of the precursor to how do we take our experiences, our expertise, our culture, our background, even our trauma, and use that in addition to the data, right? Because gut feel is data. Right. It's data plus our experiences, and really allow that to, harness that to allow us to find our edge.
All right, so I want to stick on edge. I have a few more questions here. Sure. How can founders turn being underestimated into a superpower?
Oh, there's so many different ways. Okay, so I can start with, let me give you 2. Okay. I'll give you 2 sort of examples. I'll try and make it sort of quick, but okay. So, so in my study of perceptions, okay, so let's say, let me give you an example. So let's say that someone is a founder and they have an accent, right? So I'll go back to the example of my father, right? This was one of the first things that I studied. So, what I found in dozens of studies is that if you have an accent, a non-standard American accent, for example, if you're in North America. I've studied 40 different accents, Japanese, Russian, all sorts of things. I've studied non-standard accents in different countries, like if you're in Southeast Asia, if in Europe, if you're in Belgium and you have a Flemish accent, but you're in the French region, or you're French region, you have a Flemish, all sorts of different, so non-standard accents. Right. So let's say you have a non-standard accent. What I found is that, yes, unfortunately, you're less likely to get a promotion, less likely to get a raise, less likely to get hired into top management team positions, less likely to get funding for your ventures, all sorts of different things. And I found that it was super depressing because I would conduct these studies and I would find that something like your accent would lead to these negative outcomes. And so then I started thinking, okay, well then what can we...
You have a British accent?
So controlling for all other things, education, function, everything, accents, you are less likely to have these positive outcomes.
Interesting.
The only exception, so it's so funny that you asked that, was the British accent.
I'm asking for one of our members, RF.
Yes.
Who's from the UK.
Yeah. The only exception, so French, Japanese, Italian, all sorts of, when you control for all the other factors, there's a negative outcome, except for the British accent, which is, when you have a British accent, you're more likely to be seen as educated, as humorous, so the British accent, so it's really funny that you mentioned that. Yes.
I'm
it's the only,
for my team member. RF will love this.
Yes. So you do have a premium for having a British accent, but every other accent, there is,
Because Paul and I feel like every time RF says something, he could be saying literally the same thing that Paul and I are saying, yet it just comes out that much. Comes off with like a touch of class.
Exactly. You're seen as more educated. You're seen as slightly more intelligent, right? So
he is highly educated, but yes.
Yeah. But unfortunately, if you have an accent from any of the other 39 accents that I studied, there is
not even the French. Huh?
Not even the French. Wow. Yeah. When you control for all of those other things. Okay. So this was super depressing.
This is cool.
As I started studying this. Yes. So then I was like, okay, well, I started doing research on, well, what can we do about this? How can we inoculate against accent? And it wasn't just accent that I studied, but I'll give you this one as an example. So what I started finding in my research was that perception, so accents, my father thought it was about communication. So then I started running these studies around communication. So what I would do, for example, is I would take 10 founders who had accents, 10 founders who did not have accents, okay? And I would randomize the order in which they would present at, for example, a pitch competition or to VCs or to a panel of investors. And this time around, I would ask the investors, not who would you invest in or any of the questions around investments. I would just ask them, write down 2 or 3 things that you remember about each pitch, or 2 or 3 things that you recall, or 2 or 3 things that you found significant or remarkable or interesting, or 2 or 3 things. And what I found was that not only, first I found that those investors were actually more likely to remember things and recall things from those who had accents.
Interesting.
So it wasn't about communication. It wasn't about communication at all. They actually were able to still get the information. It wasn't lost in translation. None of that stuff, right? But I also asked them, what I also found was that those who had accents were more likely to get rated negatively on things like, how mentorable is this person? How out of the box thinking is this person? How likable is this person? All of this sort of lots of different qualities that we look for when we're investing in someone, right? How mentorable are they? All sorts of different things. So what was happening was that there was these underlying perceptions, right? And I didn't ask them who would you invest in because I already knew from all my prior studies that they were less likely to invest in those with accents. Okay, so it wasn't about communication. It was about these underlying perceptions. Okay, so then what I would do is I would take these accented individuals, and the next time they would go in and pitch to an investor, I would say to them, the perception they have about you, person A, is that you're not mentorable. The perception they have about you, person B, is that you're not as out of the box thinking. The perception they have about you, person C, is that you're a technical person, but that you're not going to be able to scale this company. I gave them the exact perceptions, those underlying perceptions that was attributed to them. And I would hear them saying these astounding things during their next pitch sessions or their next discussions with VCs or whatever. I heard them take initiative and say things like, oh, and then let me tell you about a time when I fought for resources for my team. Or let me tell you about a time when I had to, solve this customer problem, and I did so in a really innovative and out of the box way. They were giving real examples, but based on those underlying and I didn't tell them to do anything. I just told them, this is the perception they have about you. And what I found was that not only were they more likely to get the funding, or get the next conversation or whatever, they were more likely to do so than those who didn't have accents. They actually gained an edge over those who had accents. Okay, so what I found was that there are these families of perceptions, right? So let's say, you're ambitious and you're resourceful. That belongs in the same family as you're arrogant, you're deceitful. And that we can flip perceptions. So I could manipulate certain situations, not manipulate in a bad way, but just subtly alter how someone describes something or gives an advantage or reframes in such a way that if somebody is thinking of you with those negative perceptions, you can flip them to the positive implications of that.
Can you give an example? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you could basically so let's say, Carey, okay, I could meet you and I could be like, wow, Carey, he's really ambitious. He's really resourceful. But somebody else could see you. You're the same person, the same exact person. But then they might be like, oh boy, that Carey, he's just really arrogant. He's just deceptive, right? All this sort of things, right? But by you understanding those underlying perceptions, but I could do it both ways. You could flip those positive perceptions to those negative manifestations, or you could do the opposite, right? And so there's this power in understanding those clusters. So you could understand let me give you a really tangible example. This one's a little bit longer. So what I'm sort of describing are static perceptions. We meet you and we think, yeah, you're really resourceful, you're really ambitious. Yeah. But what's happening really in reality all the time is that we're interacting with other people. You ask me a question, I respond in turn, right? I ask you a question, you respond in turn. And we're having this sort of interaction. And what I found is that there are these subtle ways in which people don't even realize that you're in the sort of red zone with these negative perceptions versus the green zone, these positive perceptions.
They're not self-aware, they're not reading the situation.
No, we're not always even aware of this because questions come, so what I find is that questions come in two forms. Any question that people could ask of you come in two forms, okay? So let's say that I said, Carey, tell me about yourself. What are your goals? What's your vision for this company, right? We'll keep it in the entrepreneurship context. Yeah. What's your vision for this company, right? Tell me about where you see this company going. Okay, then let's say that I ask you, on the other hand, what do you think, what type of customers do you think are going to be the hardest to tap into? What industry do you think is going to be the hardest to tap into? Or you're looking at this geography. What do you think are the biggest risks of this geography or this industry or whatever the case might be? Okay, so what's the difference between those two types of questions? Well, what I find in my research is that the first type, and it's not about positive or negative, okay? The first type are what are called promotion-oriented questions. They're about the opportunity, how big you could take something, how much you could scale something. The second type of question are what are called prevention-focused questions. They're about the risks, the obstacles, the barriers behind something. And based on who you are and what you look like, based on your gender, your race, ethnicity, class, religion, all of the typical cast of characters, your technical background, whether they're seeing you with those green perceptions, those red perceptions, that's all influencing subtly whether you get asked promotion-focused questions or prevention-focused questions. And those who get asked, and what I found was that there's a couple of key ahas when we understand that any question out there can be framed as either a promotion-oriented or a prevention-oriented question. The first is that if you get asked a prevention-focused question, you respond in turn with a promotion-oriented response. If you get asked a prevention-focused question, you respond in turn with a prevention-focused response. So that's the first thing, right? The second is that, again, based on who you are, overwhelmingly in life, you are more likely to get asked either prevention or promotion-focused questions. So, for example, people with accents are more likely to get asked prevention-focused questions. So then they respond in turn with a prevention-oriented response. And at the end of the day, who do you think investors are going to invest in? They're going to invest in those entrepreneurs who talked about how much you can grow something, how big you could scale it, all of those sort of things. And so the types of questions, right, that investors start to ask, and I'll make it a little less obvious here, right? because it's not positive or negative. These are questions we think we ask all the time. They how many daily and monthly users do you have? Right? Did you develop this in-house? Right? Did you Turing test this? Those seem like relatively innocuous questions, but those are prevention-oriented questions. They're talking about the risks, the obstacles, right? How many daily and monthly users do you have? You start talking about, okay, well, here's how I got to this and this and this. Whereas the promotion-oriented questions are like, what other use cases do you see for this product or service, right? Where else do you think you could take this product or service? What other niche markets, whatever, all these sort of things. Okay, so when you get asked the prevention-focused questions, you're much less likely to get the funding, the customer, the partner, the supplier, any of those things that you're trying to do. So what do you do about it? Okay, what I found is that when you start to notice this dynamic, when you recognize this dynamic, and you recognize that you're getting asked a prevention-focused question, you do want to answer it. But you answer it quickly, and then you flip it to a promotion-oriented response. So let's say, for example, someone says to you, boy, there are a lot of competitors in this market. How are you ever going to compete? Right? Oh man, you're in this industry where there's so many competitors. How are you going to ever compete? You do answer the question, right? You want to say, yes, there's competitor A and B or C. But what our product or service is able to do is all these things that allowed me to go after new use cases and go after all these sort of things. You take that prevention-oriented question and you turn it to a promotion-oriented response. And when you do that, I find that you're 70 to 80% more likely to get the funding, the customer, the supplier, the partner. And not only are you able to do that, you are 70 to 80% more likely to do so than those who were only asked the promotion-oriented questions. You gain an edge over those who were only asked the promotion-oriented question, right? So you gain an edge over them by trying to understand these dynamics and flipping them to your advantage. So this is just one example. I have this is there's 30, 40 different ways that we can sort of understand these biases and these perceptions and these attributions, but that's just one sort of simple answer. It was long, sorry. No. Professors were always long-winded because we have to explain the background and the data and all of that behind it, but you can flip things to your advantage.
Okay, so this is interesting because I'm curious, do you believe that every disadvantage can be turned into an advantage, or there are limits?
Yes. So every disadvantage can be turned into an advantage, but not every single time.
Okay.
So you're still going to have lots of failures, right? You're still going to have lots of times where you are discounted, right? Yeah. So it is possible to turn every disadvantage into an advantage, but you're not going to have 100%. Your batting average, you're not going to be batting 1,000, right? So there is, it's a perspective, right? I have lots of, so I always think of it like this. Like I always have lots of parents coming to me, right? And they're saying like, how do I get my kid into Harvard? How do I give them an edge, right? Right? Your book is about edge. How do I give them an edge and get them into Harvard? And I always say to them, I can tell you, right, the steps that it takes to get your kid into Harvard. I can tell you how to get an edge. But why not teach your child instead how to cultivate their own edge in any situation that they're going to be in? Because they can get into Harvard, but then they get into Harvard and then what? Then what? Yeah. They still have to get that internship. They have to get that job. They have to get into the club. They have to, all those sort of things. And it's like you change one variable. Right. And the entire equation has now shifted, right? Because perceptions are like that, right? Like someone could say, Carey, he's someone who's really ambitious, and you could be in one sector. But now you're in a different sector, and that same person is now being seen as those negative connotations. Oh wow, he's really deceptive and whatever. So like you change the mix of people that you're with, you change the industry that you're in, you change the goal of the meeting. All of those perceptions are always dynamically shifting. And so what you want to do is really understand those underlying perceptions. And so it's not about this checklist of step 1, you do this, step 2, you do this, step 3, you do this. It's really understanding the perspective and embracing that perspective on how you yourself, how do you enrich? How do you delight? How do you guide? So that in any situation that you're going to be in, that you have that edge for yourself, right? So I would say, that's kind of one way to think about it. That,
kind of, you want that adaptability.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
In any situation.
Yes.
Right?
For sure. And that adaptability, it can be trained. You can actually learn how to do this. It's hard work, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not a simple process, and you are going to have a lot of failures. But see those failures as part of the data, part of those, like that schema, the intuition that you're sort of building. So I tell students, I tell them, well, actually, I even have them do this. I have them do this exercise in my course where it's called the 10 no's, like nose, not nose, but 10 no's exercise, where they have to, over the course of a week, they have to get 10 people to say no to them. 10 people in 10 different contexts. And I know you're thinking, oh my gosh, like people say no to me all the time, right? Like people say,
just have to go sell candy bars. That's why I think everyone should do sales.
Yeah, everyone.
Go get rejected.
Yeah, exactly. Go get rejected, right? So I have them do this 10 no's exercise, and some people are like, always think like, oh no, it's so easy. People say no to me all the time, right? But actually, what you notice is that people don't say no; they hedge, right? So people say, oh no, I can't do this, but let me do this instead. Right? Or like, oh, I can't do that, but I can like do, and so that's not a no. They have to start all over with a brand new no. They have to get the person to say no sort of like, hedging. And
does ghosting count?
Like I should introduce a component of that into, I don't think that counts because it's not a full-fledged, it's not a full-fledged no, right? You have to get 10 people in 10 different contexts to say no to you. Okay. And so what they have to do is they have to write a short paragraph about each of those no's and then come ready to present, one of those no's. I don't give them any other instructions, but what we find out is there's like some astounding things that they start to discover, right? Which is, they come in and they're presenting this, and then they say things like, oh, and then this person, like, who never like acts like this, and their tone and the way their body language, and then the way that they were perceiving me, it was like, they start to see all of those underlying perceptions that they never saw before. They start to learn all of these new things that are building up the way that they see kind of the world. Because here's the thing, we're so used to trying to get people to say yes to us, trying to get people to like us, to agree with us, to see our point of view. Even when we get the no, right? Even when we get the no in our normal everyday lives, it's coming from a perspective of trying to get them to say yes to us, trying to get them to agree with us, trying to get them to like us. And so we never actually see the flip side of that, which is coming at it from a perspective of we are trying to get them to say no. We're not trying to get them to like us. We're not trying to get them to agree with us. And so we start to expand our minds and our intuition and see different ways that people see us. We start to understand how they're flipping between the positive manifestations and the negative manifestations. We start to see all of those underlying perceptions in different ways, right? And so that's why failure is not always bad. In fact, I say sometimes try, like in low stakes, low pressure interactions, try to fail. Practice. Like if you're in a bar, why try and pick up the different girls using the same pitch? Try different pitches. Try changing those variables, right? So that you know how to dynamically adjust that equation based on the sort of perceptions that you're seeing. And when you're able to do that, right, you're able to gain that edge, right? And you do that in an authentic way, in a very authentic way. Because, this advice, like be yourself, it's actually horrible advice. Right? Not for the reasons that you think I'm going to say, right? This is not about a like fake it kind of thing. It's horrible advice because be yourself. What does that even mean? Like who you are with your best friend is really different from who you are with your mother. And who you are with your mother is really different from who you are with your business partner. or your boss or whoever the case might be. But you can still be yourself with all of those people, right?
I'm trying to think if I agree with that.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about my best friend, I'm thinking about my wife, I'm thinking of...
Can you be authentic with all of those people?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I feel like I'm the same.
Really?
I feel like that's why I'm
You're the same with your wife than you are with your best friend and your business partner and your boss.
I feel like I'm me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's because you've already perfected this. But
no.
But
Okay. So here's the question I have.
Yeah.
You bring up an interesting, which is making me think, which is, if you aren't going after the yes.
Yeah.
And all the things that come with it, which is likability and getting them to, say yes, and you just really don't care.
Yeah.
If you come at the problem from a perspective of, I don't really care if I get a yes, doesn't that enable you to then be yourself?
Yes and no. Okay, think of it like this. Like every single person, this is going to sound a little bit trite, but every person is think of every person as a diamond. A single solitary diamond, okay? Every diamond has different cuts and flaws and coloring and different ways that it's gonna shine based on the lighting and the environmental conditions and the person who's looking at it, okay? Anytime you're interacting with somebody, right, all you're trying to do is show that angle of your diamond that's gonna shine the brightest. You're still the same diamond. You still have the same cuts and flaws and coloring and all the same things. But when you show that angle of your diamond that's going to shine the brightest, that's how you're going to have the deepest, richest interpersonal connection with them. That's where they're going to want to ask questions to learn more about your diamond and what's in that, right? And so what I mean by be yourselves, it's that the angle of your diamond that you're showing to your wife is different than the angle of your diamond that you're showing to your best friend or to your boss or to your partner. You're still the same diamond. You still have, so maybe that's where you're I'm still myself. Yes, you're still yourself. You're still the same diamond with the same cuts and flaws and facets and imperfections and all those sort of things.
Maybe different angles.
But you're showing it from different angles, right? And when you do that, and so what I sort of say with the 10 no's exercise is that you're trying to understand all of the different angles of your diamond. You're trying to understand how people react to one angle of your diamond that might not shine the brightest. And so when you do that, you start to understand not only what's in the rest of the diamond, but also what angles do shine well in a different way. And so that's sort of the way I think about it sometimes. And that's what I mean by you can still be yourself. But it's not really, be yourself is horrible advice, because that's almost implying that there's one singular way. There's one singular angle of being who you are, when really we're such multifaceted people. And when we when we start to embrace that and we start to understand that, understand those underlying perceptions, how we delight, right? Delight's how do we shine, right? How do we guide? How do we change the sort of angle of the diamond so that it will shine brightest? That's when we gain that edge.
I don't know if you felt like this, but I feel like as I've gotten into my 40s, I just care a lot less about what people think about me or their perceptions. I feel like I've gained this. I think I was always confident, but now I just care less about. I'm a lot more certain and sure about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it.
Yes.
And I don't know if that fits in with some of this diamond, and the facets and which. I
think people, we hear that a lot, right? I just start to when I hit 40 or 50, I just stop caring, right? Or even when I'm 40, I start realizing, when I hit 40, I stop caring. Yeah. When I hit 50, I realize that the reason why is because other people don't care, right? It's sort of that they care about and what I attribute that to is that they have honed and continue to harness their gut feel. You've started to perfect your own intuition in a way, and you trust it more. And so you now understand much more around your own patterns. You understand a lot more around your own prototypes and mental models. You now know how to slice and dice the data and interpret the data in a way, and interpret the signals, interpret people in ways that you couldn't before. So it's not just that something magically happens when you turn 40 or 50. What I think is that it takes that amount of time to get to a place where you now trust your gut feel. Because like, what is gut feel, right? That's a question that lots of people ask me all the time. And you know, I wrote a book on it. I wrote a book on the science of it. And we all think the problem with studying and trying to quantify something with gut feel is that there are thousands of lay views of what gut feel is. So we all already kind of have a definition of it. Everything from, some people think of it as like a magical, mystical quality, right? That you can look at a Van Gogh and know the difference between a fake and a real Van Gogh in seconds, right? Like a magical kind of thing. Other people are like, no. It's this like, it's really like our heuristics. We need more data, because like otherwise it's gonna lead us down this biased path, right? And everything in between. But really, one of the misconceptions about gut feel and intuition, the first actually, is that even that gut feel and intuition are the same thing. They're not. So gut feel, there's actually an intuiting process. There's a process, which is what I call the intuiting process, that results in a gut feel outcome. So there's a process and there's a discrete outcome. The process can be really, really long. It can be decades, or it could be seconds. And this is why we sometimes get confused, because when that process is sometimes seconds and then we have that gut feel, we think it's the same thing. But intuition,
can you give an example?
For sure. So during that intuiting process, there's lots of things that are happening. What we're doing is we're taking data, we're taking prompts, and we're matching it up with all of our priors. Right? And I don't want to get too like, you know, like with Bayesian statistics and priors and prompts and all those things. But essentially what's happening is that there are things that we're noticing. We're noticing, oh, like this person seems happy. Oh, there's this piece of data, there's this signal. And we have that prompt, and it's kind of recalling all of these priors that we have. That's what's happening during the intuiting process, right? It's this accumulation of our personal experiences, our expertise, our culture, our background, the people we've known, and it's combining that with data. And what results is this like summary judgment, this executive summary that gives us this momentary flash of wisdom, or this flash of like our gut feel, right? And so it can be, you know, oh, and it manifests in different ways. But let's say, for example, you're walking through a dark alley, right? And you're like, oh, like, man, I shouldn't be here, right? That's your gut feel. Yeah. But it's really based on like that piece of data. Oh, it's dark, it's empty. And in prior in like all of I've read news articles about this. I've experienced times when I feel unsafe. I'm feeling physical sensations, like I feel nervous, I feel agitated. All of these things are coming together. And so it seems like that's in seconds, but actually it's this sort of long process. And our gut feel kind of manifests. It presents itself to us in 3 ways. There are 3 ways that I found that it manifests itself. It's either a eureka moment, like this, aha, there's this problem I've been grappling with. Aha, here's the answer. A spidey sense, which is, like I shouldn't be here. Or like, oh, this person looks great on paper, but like, oh no, I don't know why. I have this like spidey sense, this right? And then the final one is a jolt. So not like an like aha, or not like an but more like an oh. Like it's this like everything you thought you knew has now been changed. Like what you thought you knew has now been disrupted. Like, oh man, I've had this like huge jolt, right? I thought I was supposed to do this, and like, no, I actually should be doing this. It's this big jolt. And so those are like the 3 ways in which gut feel presents itself to us. But we all experience those in different ways. Right? So your eureka moment might be like a feeling of excitement, or like you might feel like tingling in your fingertips. My eureka moment might be like, oh my gosh, like sort of like a nervous, like what do I do? And like, oh, like something in the pit of my stomach, like, oh my gosh, like I have it, right? So everyone sort of emotionally, physically, cognitively, we have different signals. And so we can learn how to recognize those signals for ourselves so that we can recognize our own eureka moments, our own spidey sense, our own jolt.
What I'm curious, when you talk about gut instinct, I think you've talked a little bit about this already, which is some people think it's unscientific.
Yes.
So I feel like in this book, what you're trying to do is bring together sort of the science and what people perceive as just anecdotal evidence, right? So I'm curious, how do you reconcile the intuition with the data-driven decision making?
Yeah, so it's both, right? So it's actually combined together. So intuition is combining both sort of what we feel as well as the data behind it, right? So this is one of those misconceptions, which is that intuition is like orthogonal to data, right? That it's opposite or that it's even opposite to data. That on the one hand, you can have your data, on the other hand, you have your intuition. No, actually data is in your intuition, right? So even things that are considered purely data-driven, right? Yeah. So like Moneyball, right? There was this huge like sabermetrics, like Moneyball phenomenon where it was like, oh, in baseball, like just look at the data and then you can, no, if you actually look at what they did with sabermetrics and Moneyball, and that whole phenomenon, no, there was data, but that data informed, they had to, all sorts of things combined with that data, down to like, do we put a Coke machine in the locker room or not, right? Like down to like, which metrics, like down to like, oh my gosh, look, we're looking at on base percentage versus walk percentage versus whatever. There's always a human element to everything. And when we forget that there's a human element, in today's day and age of like AI and machine learning and all of these sort of things, right? There's someone who still needs to have programmed that. There's someone who still needs to have like understood where, and that's where it gets really, really tricky. If we don't have that, instead of like artificial intelligence, there needs to be sort of that like authentic intelligence, right? There needs to be some sort of like that play, something at hand that allows us to, and that's what becomes our superpower, right? That we can do that. So
I'm actually really glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
One of my questions.
Yeah.
Do you think that AI can replace or take the place of gut?
Yeah, so I think that it can take the place of some of it, but not all of it. Okay, so, and what do I mean by that? All right, so gut feel is never wrong. Never wrong when you use it for the right questions or the right problems. That's the key. Okay, so like what I find is that there are lots of problems out there in the world, right? There are simple problems, there are complicated problems, there are complex problems, and there are chaotic problems, okay? So if you look at the sort of types of problems that are out there. Simple problems, if you think about simple problems, they're probabilistic outcomes. There is a right or wrong binary answer. It's a coin flip, right? You can say, yes, it's gonna be heads 50% of the time over the course of the universe. Yes, it's gonna be, okay. Simple problems, we don't need our gut feel for. We should never use our gut feel for, right? If we use our gut feel for a simple problem, at best, it's going to be redundant, right? At worst, it's going to be wrong, completely wrong, because it's not the right type of problem. Okay, but that's sort of an easy one, right? We know that. All right, complicated problems becomes a little more complicated because complicated problems are really just a series of simple problems stacked on top of each other. Okay, but because they are stacked on top of each other, sometimes they look so complicated or they take so long that we get lazy, right? We start to use our gut feel, even though there is still a right or wrong answer, there still is a probabilistic outcome. We should not be using our gut feel for complicated problems, right? But we do anyways. This is where we start to use heuristics. We start to use anchoring bias, sunk cost bias, all of these sort of things. And that's why we sometimes are like, oh, but our gut feel, we need to get more data. Well, that's because it's a complicated problem. You just didn't, you either needed to learn that area of expertise, find the right person who had the right answer, but we didn't. We tried to do it. And so when we use our gut feel for that, again, we're either going to be wrong or at best will be redundant. Okay, but then there are complex problems where at best, right, we're going to be able to get 80% of the data. We will never have all of them.
Yeah.
Most of the time we only have 20 or 30% of the data, right? And that's where complex and chaotic decisions are where investment decisions lay,
Yes.
right? Because
That's the world I live in.
exactly, because even if you got all of the data
Right.
on that industry or that product or whatever, consumer preferences change, industry shifts, regulation shift, there's all of this complexity, there's all of this chaos. And so we can't rely just on data. We have to rely on our experience, our patterns, all of these other things. We have to rely on our gut feel. And that doesn't mean that your gut feel and someone else's gut feel need to be exactly the same.
True.
Because your gut feel might tell you to invest, and somebody else's gut feel might tell you them not to invest, and you would both be right.
Yep.
Because by you investing, you now are taking action,
Yep.
and whatever gut feel you took, you're now going to make that the right decision because you're going to do the mentoring, you're going to make the introductions, you have a different thesis,
Yep.
you have all of those things that make it, based on your experience and all of those things, the right decision.
I've always said a great investment, typically the ones that have the highest payouts, in the beginning, you can always make a great bull case and a great bear case.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for entrepreneurs who are deciding, right, which, if you just look at the data, if you just look at, here's the valuation they're giving me, right, here's the pre-money, here's the post-money, here's the da-da-da-da-da, you're missing that gut feel piece, which is this venture capitalist, like, what else have they invested in? What's in their portfolio? What's their style? What's their thesis, right? There's all of this other thing, right? And so if we go back to sort of the AI, there is no prompt that you can ask ChatGPT. There is no sort of question that people are going to come at it from different ways.
Right.
And you're going to get different responses.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet, right? There are all sorts of different dynamics at play, even with, AI and all of these things. And I guess the last thing that I'll sort of add to that is the reason why I think it's even more critical that we do hone and harness our own intuition, our own gut feel in this age where there's a lot of data. There are algorithms, there's AI, there's machine learning, there's all of these things, is because one of the things I talk a lot about in my book and in my research is that we don't do a good enough job at listening to what whispers and not what screams. We don't listen to what whispers because we're listening to what screams. And increasingly, we're in a society where there's so much screaming at us, like literally loud, like ambulances and dishwashers and washing machines, because, of the Industrial Revolution, we have all of these tools and these things, but also things that are now screaming at us that we don't even, that we don't notice, because like we're getting recommended the next YouTube video before we even get a chance to really decide, right? And so we're even being told what direction our mental model should go in, right? We're getting told, here's the next thing you should learn. Here's the next thing. We're getting recommended books. We're getting recommended. And so it's like when you make a decision, when most people trying to make a decision, what's the first thing they do? Well, they pick up the phone or they ask somebody that they call. They're like, okay, here's what I'm struggling with. What would you do? Right? And then they do this and they do this, and these are with people that they trust and respect. And so it's like they're having a dinner party, filling it up with people that they trust and respect, asking them to help them make a decision. But what we don't do is the equivalent of leaving one of those seats open at the dinner party for ourselves, our own voice, our own whispers. And so we sort of discount our own, what do we want to watch on YouTube? We discount our own, what do we think in this situation? We stop practicing this skill of like knowing what's whispering to us. And so what we do is we hear these whispers, but then we shove it away. And then we get worse and worse at noticing what is whispering to us. And so with AI as well, even when we are relying on artificial intelligence to help us do our jobs better, right? Even just doing the equivalent of leaving one of those seats at the dinner table for ourselves, right? Like taking whatever we're getting spit out at and being like, what would I add to this? What did they miss, right? Doing that allows us to be listening to the screams, but also listening to what whispers. Or before we write the prompt, thinking like, what would I expect? What do I expect this to give to me, right? Because how else do you know? It's like when you're asking someone a question, I always say when you're asking somebody a question, know in the back of your mind, intuitively, somehow, know, think about what answer are you expecting them to say? Because how else would you know if you're surprised or not, right? How else would you know if that's like, if you're learning something or you're being surprised by someone or, like, so you should always kind of have a, like, oh, is that what I expected kind of mentality so that you're preserving your own whispers.
It's interesting because sometimes when we ask a question, at least at our firm, we don't necessarily care about the answer.
Yeah.
We're actually more, I think what we weigh more is how you answered the question. Are you thoughtful?
Yeah.
Did you think about this scenario?
Yeah.
Did you think about that?
Yeah.
That. So I think it's more the process than actually the result.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I'm curious. So we're going to dig in a little bit more on this AI stuff because since you teach higher ed and undergrads, right? Because you teach
only. I teach all. I teach.
Yeah, you teach it all. Exactly.
Undergrads, MBAs, and executive education.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're headed with AI? Just from an educator's perspective, I want to ask you about two things. So the first question is really about, do you think AI are going to take away our jobs? Because that's number one. And then number two is, what is your perspective on students using AI? And I'll have a follow-up on that one.
Yeah. So AI, my perspective on AI, and this is like, I have no idea how like contentious this answer is or what. I see AI a little bit like what's happening. So this is gonna, this parallel is gonna seem like a little bit strange at first, but I'll integrate it, I promise. Okay, so I see it a little bit like the rich-poor divide. Okay, so when we look at what's happening in the economy, right? There was a period where there was a very strong middle class.
Yep.
And increasingly what we're seeing is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, right? And it's becoming much more difficult to be a part of the middle class, to be a part of like the solid middle class. And so the middle class see themselves kind of slipping, right? And there's a couple that, some that may be in the upper middle class that are aspirational and that are sort of, making their way up. And so we're seeing this larger and larger divide, okay? And
not just in the US.
Globally. I see the same thing happening with AI in the future, far in the future. Whereas right now there's a big middle class, okay? Where what I mean by that is that AI is opening up a lot of opportunities for people. People are able to be more efficient with their work. They're learning new skills. They're able to, and it's creating this really, this leveling almost, right? Where people who had expertise, well, if you didn't have that expertise, you could still get the lines of code that would get you close to that, right? It's like leveling the playing field in lots of ways, right? Right? And, but I think what's gonna happen eventually, sadly, is that those who are continuing to push the envelope, to continue to like at the cutting edge of the algorithms, of how it works, of like the new use cases, all sorts of things, they're gonna be sort of this elite that people are gonna start to not really understand how that works. We're gonna start to lose sight of like, how exactly is this being done? How exactly? And then the people who are starting to, then there's going to be sort of this push towards like, okay, well, AI actually is not, it's going to do away with my jobs. It's going to do away with all of the sort of like things that we needed to do, right? So that kind of like that layer of like all of the support functions, all of those service functions, all of those things that we needed, AI is going to replace, right? And so it's going to replace, but it's going to be replaced in like this huge way, right? So there's going to be sort of this like divide where it's going to be this really big, and people are going to find themselves struggling because the disappearance of this middle class means that yes, there will be lots more jobs, but they'll be up here.
Right.
And yes, there's going to be a lot of jobs down here, but it's going to be replaced. So they're going to be replaced. And so it's not on an aggregate numbers level, will there be less jobs? No. There might be a fairly equivalent number of jobs. It's just, and you've heard this before, right? This is not contentious. People talk about this all the time. It's just going to change the nature of work, right? But what makes me a little bit fearful is that how do we preserve that middle layer? How do we make sure that, because unfortunately people are going to fall into that chasm if we don't. Because as AI continues, and I think you get the analogy, right? As we continue to get more and more strong in one area and more strong in the other area, people will fall into that chasm.
Okay, so let's move on to the second question.
Yeah.
As an educator, and I've heard this at Stanford, where a professor now does not provide the case study before the class because too many students are feeding it into ChatGPT and spits out the proper answer, if you will, which really defeats the whole purpose of the case study, which I believe is the process, not what actually happened or how would you have done it, right? It's like, as you talked about earlier, what would you do in this scenario? How do you respond? How do you react? Depending on what the case study is. So as an educator, how do you think AI should really be used in the classroom to really as an aid and not as a replacement for thinking?
So, I think there's a variety of ways, right? In that particular example, yes, you can sort of say, like, I'm not going to give you the case before. Now we're going to have this authentic discussion without any of that. You can also, you can do that. Then you can say, okay, we've had this discussion. Now compare it to what. Now everyone go and compare it to what the answer is, or what technology and AI has told us, right? And then you take it the extra step, right? And you said, okay, now that we have this additional perspective, what was missing from what we had originally said? Or what could we add? What's that additional layer that we could build on top? Where else could we take this? Where are all the other things? And so what I think should happen is, and what I try, my sort of philosophy, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, is that this is not going to be sustainable. It is not going to be a really salient thing for us unless we do have innovation still in sort of that middle layer. We still need to have huge innovation, disruptive startups, things, and that's what I'm actually looking for. Because yes, you can make lots of bets around the top layer. If you think even of S-curves, right? Okay, so if you think of the market S-curve, right? So where you have the innovators and then the early adopters and right? To the laggards, okay. Or you think about the technology S-curve, right? Like Moore's law, right? You're having S-curves that displace each other, right? Technology, half the, all of those sort of things. You've got all these S-curves, and what a lot of the investments are around, what a lot of the money goes to, is all things that are at the very early stages, right? The beginning of the S-curve for the market S-curve, the beginning of the S-curve, or that before it got displaced, technology S-curve. But there's a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of, so the middle piece of it is where I see that there's, how do I describe this? Okay, so let's say we look at, something like watches, okay, for example. And this is probably not a good, from an investment point of view, but just from a thought experiment kind of point of view, right? Yeah. So there was a period of time when watches like the Hublot, the Omegas, the really high-end sort of luxury watches were going out of style because they couldn't actually tell time, as well as these digital watches or our cell phones or these precision types of technology, right? So even though they called it precision, watchmaking, they didn't actually tell time. You had to wind them or whatever. Until we started thinking about it, we started thinking more about it as Jean-Claude Bevere, right, who was the CEO of Hublot and Omega and all these sort of things, was sort of this visionary. And he really changed the industry in a sense that Jean-Claude Bevere then said, well, no, these are not about telling time. This is about tradition. It's the watch that you pass down from person to person, to your son, your grandson. It's the graduation gift that you give, right? And now the industry is huge, where there's watches that are hundreds of thousands of dollars that actually don't tell time, as well as your cell phone or your Swatch watch, right? Or whatever the case may be. Okay, there's also if you look at pots and pans, right? And you follow the technology S-curve, right? First we started out with really kind of old caveman types of pans, and then the technology got better and we got Teflon and non-stick and all these sort of things. And then what happens? Oops, we realize that they cause cancer. Okay? And so companies like Lodge are now making a killing because people are going backwards on that S curve, and now everyone wants cast iron pans, right? All of these sort of, but that was actually a technology that from a long, long time ago, right? So we're sort of preserving this middle layer because of these things. Or rubber bands, that's another one that comes to rubber bands. Like, this is something that, like, we buy like a rubber band for like $200 for $1, right? A bag of rubber bands. It's a very commoditized product that's at the end of its S curve, right? But yet, a couple years ago, people were selling rubber bands for like $20 a bag or whatever, because people were buying silly bands. They were in different shapes. Or you remember those rainbow loom things where kids were making jewelry out of it? And now you're not selling rubber bands. Now you're selling like an educational, fine motor skill, like spatial reasoning. It was like an educational tool. Okay, so I think the same thing, that's what I'm looking out for, is like, yes, there's going to be those ideas that you're sort of getting at the beginning of the S curve and following. Yeah. But with AI, you're not sure which of those, right? It's super competitive. You're not sure which of you know that there's going to be 2 or 3 winners, but you don't know which of those are going to be winners. Right. You also don't know, as the world kind of changes, you also know that there's going to need to be something for that middle class. Just like right now, we're struggling in the economy to figure out different regulations, different laws, different all these sorts of things. Like, what do we do about the middle class? What do we do about their college education? How do we make sure that they're skilled? How do we make sure we have enough electricians and plumbers and all of the, all of this sort of, we're also going to need to do the same thing as AI and technology comes about. And that's where I think entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurship ecosystem really needs to pay attention and find those as well.
Do you feel like the value of higher ed then, in a world where AI can level people up, goes down?
Yes. I think that society as a society, we have started arbitrarily putting prestige on things that we have somehow gone off course in terms of what is prestigious and what is not. And though Harvard is an amazing place, and you're going to get amazing sort of things there, I think that the value of that, the metrics, the actual the criteria by which we look at certain things, that it's going to sort of wash out some of those criteria. That you're going to be able to take people who are, there are some tremendous, I think we're already seeing that to some extent, where the brand is still very strong. Yes. The brand will always be strong, and I have a different philosophy on why the brand will be strong. Again, that's slightly controversial, but I have a theory on why the brand will always be controversial. Yeah. But the value will gosh, how do you say that? How do I explain this? Just like when you think about designers, right? Chanel will always be a really strong brand, yes. Okay? But now you're also seeing that there's lots of luxury brands, yes, that people also value, right? Everything from Jimmy Choo to Balenciaga, I don't know how to pronounce that, yeah, but LVMH, also Louis Vuitton, all sorts of different things. So while Chanel will still stay strong, it's not like if you're getting a designer purse, it has to be the Chanel now. Now there's a lot more discretion. There's a lot more personal kind of differentiation. There's a little bit more, so there's a lot more that kind of still has that high status, but still has that value.
Or I guess asked in another way, do you think the top 100 schools will still have these incredible people who apply to their schools, but the admission rates are still extremely low?
Higher education is broken in a lot of ways. We have gotten off course in higher ed with a lot of what education is and what we're trying to teach, and what education. It's like there's 2 things being confounded. One is, how do you learn what you want to learn, and what do you learn? right? And I think those two things are being confounded. And so that's why, to sort of answer your question, I think that there are really, for example, there are great engineering schools that are out there. There are super, super strong engineering schools that are out there. Some of those engineering schools have top brands. Some of those engineering schools don't have top brands. And then there are top brands that don't even have engineering. So say, right? So say you're a student and you're a really smart person and you're not sure what you want to do. Right. You do have kind of that engineering mentality. You kind of think you might go in that direction and you're making that decision. Right. Okay. So how do you make that decision? Do you go to these really top programs that are going to teach you how to think and that are going to teach you what you sort of need to know, but maybe have a lower brand? Do you go to schools that have a higher brand that might not teach you how you want to think, or maybe they do teach you how you want to think, but they don't teach what you want to know, and all of it sort of gets confounded and muddled and interspersed, right? And so what I think is going to happen is that as industries evolve, as the startup ecosystem evolves, as all of those sort of things evolve, what we're going to really place a premium on is not necessarily just the brand. It's not going to be just that sort of prestige around the brand. And I think we're seeing that already. You see a lot of top companies that are like, oh yeah, well, like, yeah, you've got a great Ivy League branded education, but like, I don't want some of those people because they come in with high expectations. They come in with, a different kind of chip on their shoulder. They don't come in it with this mentality of like, how do I gain that edge? How can I take those constraints and flip them in my favor? They come in with this perspective of like, I've earned my place here. Here's what I can do. Let me show you what I can do, rather than, so not to say that they're not super intelligent. They are. But there's lots of different types of intelligence, and it's what the types of intelligence that people are going to continue to value.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how this evolves over the next 20, 30 years, as we're already seeing, let's say, for example, we have an advisor who teaches machine learning at Cal, grade school, right? Yeah. And he was saying this is the first year where by spring, the majority of the seniors, if not all of them, have had multiple offers. Think of Google, Facebook, right? I mean, these are the top of the top engineering students. This year, most of them did not have any jobs. And so what we're seeing is, imagine you were this student expecting a pot of gold at the end of your 4 years. You've worked hard, you've studied the classes you thought you were supposed to study, and at the end of it, you were supposed to have this amazing offer from the likes of a Google, maybe an OpenAI, or insert your big well-funded company. And that didn't happen. And so I think what's interesting, while tragic, is we're in this transition period already with first the engineers, due in part to the advances of AI and the speed in which it's accelerating. And they're the first to be dislocated already. So I'm kind of curious,
so I think one thing that comes to mind about this is like, I've got like 6 things that I want to say all on this topic all at one time. I mean, the first is like this displacement, right? Everything's being displaced, right? We're just noticing it more because we're taking one arena that used to be super, super hot, right? And we're seeing the contrast, right? But everything is being displaced to some extent. It doesn't matter what you're majoring in, you're seeing like less of everything, right?
It's a question of order and who's first.
Exactly, right? And so, because engineers were always sort of, or the tech, computer science, all of that. So now it's sort of like the low-hanging fruit, because like, look, we can make so much, we can have such a big inefficiency, like we have such an opportunity for efficiency here, right? Where we only have an incremental efficiencies here, right? So I think that's one aspect of it. The other is that what's happening is that even when you're talking about like Cal and what's happening at Cal, the individual versus so Cal used to be a replacement. That one label, like you're an engineer from Berkeley or you're an engineer from, wherever. from any top tier, whatever, that used to be a replacement. Almost like you didn't even really care about the individual to some extent.
Yeah.
You do, but like, you know that because they've got that brand name, okay, well, let's try and scoop up as many of these people as they want because they're a scarce resource,
100%.
and that's a substitute for actually needing to know because we know we can just trust that they've learned a certain thing, subset of things, whatever, okay. Yeah. And so what you're seeing now, I think, is that because of this inefficiency, because there's more efficiency built into AI and less, there's not just this pure substitute, right? You can't just say like, because we need 100,000 tech people, let's just take 100,000 and it doesn't matter who, as long as we think that they're relatively well trained, and then we'll look at the idiosyncrasies and differences later, right? Now there's much more of we don't need all of those because AI is replacing all of this. So now we need to be much more discriminating in terms of what's the individual pieces of it that we need, right? And those individual pieces, you can't just differentiate based on the brand, because what is happening is that those brands relied so much, they had so much goodwill from just the legacy of their brand name, that it's almost like they got away from teaching or covering or having, right? And so what I'm seeing and like, is that practical experience. People now want, like, what have you done? Right. What is your experience? Show me like what it is you've done, or at least show me how you think about these things. And I think that's gonna be increasingly important for any major, but specifically because those technology people are still going to be highly in demand. Okay. We're still going to need people to run the factories, to oversee the things, to be able to design things. And so you might see it more now, and it feels much more poignant now for the coders because, the coders
they came for them first.
Yeah, they came for them first. But, I think that there's going to be a little bit of a rebounding because I think we're sort of overcompensating, and then we're going to realize that we actually do need some of those. We do need some of those people, but let's see how things play out. I think it is a really uncertain time for people who are now trying to figure out what they're trying to do. Yeah.
Because what I'm seeing with companies is that they are paying a lot now.
Yeah.
For senior developers. Yes.
Right? Again, that divide, that rich-poor divide. The
exactly.
Rich are getting richer. They're paying a ton. Like, look what Meta's paying.
I know.
Like,
I know.
Yeah.
Here's the question, though, that no one's had a good answer for me yet. Yeah. Maybe you could.
I'll try.
Yes. Is how do you become a senior developer if you can't even get hired to be a junior developer?
Yeah. Yeah.
You need, like we talked about earlier, how do you train that gut? Yeah. How do you train that instinct, that intuition? Yeah. Because the challenge with most engineering is not just what you learn from the book, but actually how you applied it over time, and how you keep adding to that intuition, that gut feel.
Okay, so I have two answers.
Okay.
The first is a little bit. Maybe I should give you the safe one first. Now I'm going to start with the dangerous one. Okay. The first answer that I have for you is, why do you need to? Why do you need to build your way up? What I would say is that one way you can think about it is like first principles thinking, okay? So becoming that senior developer and then the senior developer, If you can't, and you know that this is gonna be increasingly difficult, go back to really understanding the first principles. Go back to really understanding all of that, like forget being that T-shaped person, right? That we all think, because what's happening is that those T-shaped people are getting disrupted. Yeah. We don't need those T-shaped people anymore, right? What we really need, so forget about that. Forget about sort of climbing slowly your way up to that, to become that, because it's like you're already behind. Right. That industry has already evolved, and if you're just starting out, what you can do is really understand the first principles. You can go back to, and I don't mean this literally, but go back to like learning COBOL and assembler and all of these sort of languages, and like, how does that actually work? That's what, Jensen Huang actually did, right? Instead of kind of going along with the hype and all of these sort of things, he's like, no, I'm gonna build my own completely new platform, and then everything's gonna be built on top of that, right? So you can sort of go back to those first principles and truly understand whatever area you're in, whether it's graphics, whether it's design, whether it's algorithms, whatever that is. And if you're truly passionate about that and you develop that, The other stuff will come in time where they're going to need somebody and they're going to pay a huge premium for somebody that's not going to have all of the sophistication, but is going to have the base sort of thing, right? And so let me give you a really tangential example of this, right? So let's say that you're an electrician and there's all of these new fancy ways of wiring and all of this sort of stuff, and like you can never catch up, right? You feel like you can do the equivalent of never being able to catch up, but you really understand the electricity behind it. You understand like knob and tube, right? And how knob and tube works. And then one day there's like this huge renovation of a museum, this new like Getty or the new MoMA or whatever, and they have this building and it was built in like the early 1900s, and they need somebody, this really complicated knob and tube, the basics of it. They're gonna come looking for you. You're gonna be the one who is gonna be able to charge a premium, and you don't even, right? So that's one perspective. Okay, the other perspective, which is kind of the safer option, which is like you find pockets for yourself, right? That's the beauty of entrepreneurship. You find ways that you can just be okay with being that senior developer with that sort of, and that's what I sort of mean about like preserving that middle layer, right? You find a company that is doing that. Maybe it's not as sexy of a company, maybe it's not as whatever, but that those can still be very, very lucrative. Those can still be very, very rewarding. And not every company is going to be the next, whatever, the next name, pick your company, pick your, there's going to be a lot of like, you don't need to be that, gazillion, once you can still have a very good company having a 300 million exit or a 600 million exit. You don't need to have that 3 billion exit or whatever. And those are like incremental. And then nowadays, everything is about acquisitions, right? We do still see IPOs, but everything now is about like, companies don't even invest in R&D as much anymore because they have a ton of cash. They want to sell a great growth story to Wall Street, and what do? They just cherry pick what they want. So positioning yourself to be cherry picked, to be a part of that growth story in some small niche area, you can start to develop that. So that's kind of the safer answer. I gave you one of both.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. What myths about success do you wish more entrepreneurs would unlearn?
Myths about entrepreneurship.
Myths about success.
Success.
Yeah.
Myths about success.
Because you talked a little bit earlier about kind of the unconventional.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I've got so many myths about success that they would be
unlearn.
I feel like I've given you so many. Let me try and I've given you so many, so let me try and come up with some more, because some of the myths, right? One of the myths that we talked about was like that hard work, right? And we talked about how hard work alone is not enough. Hard work comes at the end, right? It's critical, but it comes at the end. I also talked a lot about like being yourself, like the myths about like being authentic and being yourself and how we can actually revision that. We talked a little bit about like myths around like what's screaming and the data and like listening to what whispers and all of that. I think, okay, I have one, I probably have one that is a little bit new. Like we tend to like intuitively think that success is about like going from point A to point B to point C, right? And what I feel like is when we do that, we start, like we say, oh wow, like look at this woman or this man, and he went from A to B, like, and I want to be at B, right? So what did they do? Okay, well they got their MBA, then they did a stint in sales, and then they got some international experience in like Asia and Africa and the Middle East, right? And then we're like, okay, so that's what I'm gonna do, right? I'm gonna try and like get my MBA, do a stint in sales, and then get some international experience. But you will never, because you're a different person, if you follow that exact same path, you will not get to B. Because you are a completely different person with different experiences, right? And so what I think is like, rather than the myth of like following paths and aspiring towards goals, and we all talk about this, like what's your big, like what's your big goal? Like what's that thing? Like I want to do this. I kind of think like, go for directionality instead. Don't even have that goal. right? Don't even have that goal. Just go for directionality. Know which quadrant you're aiming for,
Okay.
right? Know what general quadrant you're aiming for, and then don't have those goals, because you could end up at B, but you could end up at lots, like B prime and B double prime and all sorts of different other points, but that are still in that quadrant that will lead you to really impactful, successful things. And so I know this sort of goes counter to like what a lot of entrepreneurs and what a lot of successful people even think about, which is like, have that goal in mind. If you can envision it, if you can see it, you can make it happen, right? And sometimes I think about it as like, don't envision it, because then you're envisioning something so specific, right? That you don't open yourself up to all of these other possibilities, right? So like, have more of a vague kind of thing. Go for that directionality, and if you're still the same, if you still have the same ambition, if you still have the same work ethic, if you still thought about the ways in which you enrich, if you've thought about the ways that people perceive you, if you thought about your own authentic ways that you delight others, that you delight your customers, that you guide others, I guarantee you, you will still be tremendously successful. And you will find that, you know, you didn't have to specify that one thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks a lot for doing this. This has been awesome.
Of course. Anything for you, Carey.
No. This has been awesome. I think I only got through like half the questions.